Okay then, B2D is all about interdependence and how living organisms live in an ecosystem where they live off different resources. Now, there is always a lot of competition for these resources. For instance, plants will compete for light, space, water, minerals from the soil and carbon dioxide, whereas animals may compete for food, space or territory, mates, water and shelter. Now, there's two different types of competition, and you may not have heard of these words before. You've got something called intraspecific competition and interspecific competition. You have to be very careful with your spellings on these, because you will lose marks if you put the wrong one down. Interspecific is between organisms of different species, whereas intraspecific is between groups of organisms of the same species, such as two troops of baboons on the African plains. Now, this is more of a problem, because if you've got two groups that are after the same resources, it could end up with them fighting for just one resource, and one will end up being stronger than the other. I've tried to think of a way to remember this, and the only one I can think of is if you think of international football between different football teams, that might help you to remember that interspecific is between organisms of different species. So international football and interspecific competition, different species. Often different generations are not in competition for the same food. However, there is something called an ecological niche that you maybe will know. An ecological niche is the role a particular species plays in an ecosystem. For instance, worms don't seem that significant, but worms are really important because they support an ecosystem by first of all burrowing through soil, and they take in the soil, take out the microbes that they need, and then give off what they don't. And by doing that, they are making little burrows, and that is helping the oxygen to get into the soil to help the microbes. But the other thing they do is they provide a food source for birds, so they play a very important ecological niche. When you're talking about squirrels, the problem there is that they both have the same ecological niche. They both need the same foods, they need the same homes and resources. And the problem is, in Britain we used to have a really good population of red squirrels until someone went abroad and saw these lovely little furry grey squirrels and said, oh, aren't they cute, brought them back, introduced them to this country, and because they've got the same ecological niche, they were taking over from the red squirrels, they were eating all the food from the red squirrels, they were taking over their homes, until eventually the grey squirrels have become more dominant and have more numbers in this country, and the red squirrel numbers have gone down. If you look at the next thing, parasites, you may be asked to give a definition of a parasite. Now, a parasite is an organism that lives off its host organism and causes it harm. Head lice, for instance, are a parasite. They've got little claws, and they basically hold onto your hair, and then they stab you, and that itching is when they stab you, because they're taking the blood out of you to help their reproductive system. And it is a complete parasitic relationship, because they are just harming you all the time and not actually giving anything back. Mistletoe is a parasite because it lives off the trunk of a tree, and what it does is it actually digs its roots into that trunk to take all the glucose from and the minerals from the plant for its own uses. Now, another word you may have come across is something called a mutualistic relationship. If you think about a mutual friendship is where you and another person are friends, and you both benefit from that friendship because you're both putting energy and time into it. Well, this is the same thing with animals. Both animals will benefit from the relationship. A good example of this is something called the oxpecker, which is a little bird which eats little ticks and fleas and other parasites off the skin of buffaloes. Now this is good because it gives the oxpecker something to eat, and also it helps the buffalo because the buffalo actually gets rid of all of the insects and things that can cause it to have diseases. So it's a mutualistic relationship. I talked to you earlier about the pea plants, the legumes, and the nitrogen fixing bacteria. That again is a mutualistic relationship. Now you may have come across this kind of graph before. This is a predator-prey graph, and it's something called cyclic fluctuation. Now if you look there, you'll see the black line at the top represents the numbers of prey, and the red line at the bottom represents the numbers of predators. And scientists actually realised that there was a relationship, and the very first study of this came about in Canada between 1845 and 1937, when they had the prey was something called a snowshoe hare, and the predator was something called the Canadian lynx. And the reason the biologists realised there was a pattern is because at that time hunters used to go and hunt these animals and collect their furs, and then they used to count them all up, and they put all these numbers into a graph, and they noticed that one year there would be a high number of the snowshoe hares, but then there'd be low numbers of the lynxes. And then the next year they'd noticed there was high numbers of the lynxes and low numbers of the the prey. And they were trying to work out what was going on. And really what was happening is that when you've got a lot of prey, a lot of the snowshoe hares, it meant there was lots of food for the predators. So the predators could have lots and lots of food, they'd all be strong, they'd reproduce and have lots and lots of babies, which then meant you'd have a lot of predators because you've now got the lynxes that could go and eat the prey. Now when you've got lots of lynxes all fighting for the same food, this means then that the numbers are going to go down. So when all the numbers of the food goes down, it means there's not enough for reproduction to take place, and so the numbers of lynxes would go down. And then when the numbers of lynxes would go down, it means the hare numbers would go up because they had a chance to reproduce. And they noticed that this pattern emerged. And when biologists have carried out this kind of study with other organisms, they've realised this self-regulating pattern happens over and over again. And this is an example of a predator-prey population.